Hey, John Gilroy here. According to Microsoft's Digital Defense Report, cyber attacks are up 87% on hybrid and cloud. Today, let's talk about adapting to this paradigm shift. Hit the music, Manny. Welcome to the Federal Tech Podcast, the podcast that connects you to federal technology leaders. My name is John Gilroy, and I'll be your moderator. Our guest in the virtual studio is Travis Roseik. He is Public Sector CTO for Rubrik, R-U-B-R-I-K. Travis, this is a big topic. Ready to handle it?
I'll do my best, John. Great to be with you again.
Yeah. U.S. critical infrastructure, Microsoft Defense Report, all kinds of attacks coming probably from China. So let's jump into this. I mean, I'm basing this conversation on a recent interview on 60 Minutes. Well, it's bubbled up to the point where commercial television is talking about attacks in critical infrastructure. It's everywhere. It's everywhere. Is that the case, Travis?
Yeah, there's no hiding from it. So unless you're going back to a cave with pen and paper, you can't really get away from it.
Yeah. So give us a perspective here. You were just at a DoD conference. Maybe you can talk more about threats and something called critical infrastructure, maybe define that and just give our listeners a basic idea, then we can drill down.
Sure. Yeah, just on the definition of critical infrastructure. So, from Department of Homeland Security's categorization, there's 16 critical infrastructure sectors. The defense sector is one, healthcare, finance, electricity, power. So chemical industry. So kind of thinking about all the things that as a society we need to survive, or what enables, our economy and safety. So all of those are all deemed critical infrastructure sectors. And obviously any cyber attack or disruption to any one of those has not just consequences to that company or that industry vertical, but also us as like citizens or, visitors to America or our partners.
So it's everywhere. And I think what's happened is there's been a lot of, let's say, water systems, electrical systems that people may not have been proactive about securing. And what happens is identity credentials can get stolen. People can get in. Bad things happen. But maybe bad things don't happen. Maybe they just go in and change identities and sit there. I mean, so I guess, what are they trying to accomplish anyway? Apparently, if they're not attacking, they're sitting there waiting to attack.
So, yeah, I mean, I think just a quick, history lesson, kind of looking at the evolution of cyber threat actors, which I spent most of my career working on either studying or building mitigations or emulating those to assess critical systems. So, historically, decades ago was kind of, deemed hackers. Hey, we're going to show that we can do stuff. It was more for notoriety, attention. And then it kind of started evolving from there to, cyber espionage, intelligence community, nation state threat actors. How can we leverage this to gain insights? And then over the next 10, 20 years, the cyber criminal element, gangs, stealing IP, monetizing the IP. And then we've, nation states stealing, lots of innovation from the U.S. and building that in other countries. So that's kind of where historically we've seen tremendous amounts of transfer of wealth occur, and that was maybe the last 10 or 15 years. What's really changing now is with the disruption of attacks and the amount of money that organizations, cyber criminal organizations, and their relationships with, adversarial nation states, how they're enabled to operate, how they're actually working on their behalf, but how they're monetizing it. And then, really having these disruptive effects. So it's really impacting. So we look at like Colonial Pipeline or, 10 or plus years ago with Sony Pictures in North Korea. And everyone was like, wow, we didn't know Sony Pictures could do something that was that impactful. So we're seeing the potential of what catastrophic effects a cyber attack could be. So fast forward to today, every industry vertical, critical infrastructure, our way of life is even more dependent on IT and all of these systems. And if there's just an outage or a benign or a friendly fire issue with some type of a bug or something that brings down systems, we see tremendous impacts. We can't travel, we can't buy things, we can't get insurance, see a doctor, etc. So just thinking about the next step is how could a foreign adversary take our dependents, who's been historically very effective in stealing IP through hacking? How can they turn that to having kinetic effects for military advantage? And I think what's happened in the last several years with a lot of the various typhoon attacks and the 60-minute segment and kind of the wastewater treatment facilities, electrical grid, things like that, where the OT environments have some connection to the internet for remote monitoring and management. There's also the dramatic increase in supply chain attacks as well. So there's so many different facets where the adversary historically has had access to systems to steal IP. Now we're seeing them use the same capabilities to get access to things where there aren't IP. So talking to a lot of the government leadership, some of the people who study this in the commercial industry for threat intelligence analysts, their motive, the target or the victim has no IP. Like that's pretty well understood. But what they do have is the ability to have dramatic effects on citizens of the country. So if you can't access clean water, if the water is poisoned, if they affect the power grid, if they affect our ability in the financial sector or transportation or the military. So those are the things where the motive isn't financially motivated. It's not for intelligence purposes. It's actually for the first strike in a multi-domain type of kinetic attack.
Travis, you cite engineering, I cite history. I read this guy named Alfred Thayer Mahan, and he talked about defense and the United States, talked about we need two big moats, the Atlantic and the Pacific, two big moats. And I think a lot of maybe cybersecurity defense has been, we'll put up a moat and prevent it. But what you're talking about is, no, they're inside already. If they're inside the power plants, they're inside the water control facilities, is that assume there's someone's in there. And so the next step is, how do you get resilience? You have to have some kind of a coordinated defense or some kind of way to recover from an attack, because it's going to happen, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it to this point is pretty much inevitable. So, and the scale and scope, the way the adversaries are using AI to help initiate attacks, it's just going to increase their ability to impact significantly more victims or gain more access. So, and then they just sit there in dormancy, waiting until it's time for them to, hey, it's time to go do X, Y, Z. All right, now let's leverage all of the work we've already been putting in for the last several years. So
this could be a frustrating experience where there are savvy people in the DoD who are using AI to maybe bolster their defenses, but the malicious actors are using AI as well, and it's a back and forth game that's only accelerating, and AI is positive and is increasing, finding out where your vulnerabilities are, but the opponent can figure out the vulnerabilities. Maybe they're looking at older vulnerabilities and just go after those.
So I think the kind of Star Trek fans that, Kobayashi Maru, it's almost one of those unwinnable scenarios. So the adversary just has to get lucky one time, and the defensive organizations, have basically tried to prevent 100% of attacks. So, but the way the acquisition models are, the way organizations are so disconnected and disjointed, they're siloed, the way the laws and policies are, and then just the bureaucracy, the complexity to maintain, modernize, update on the defensive side, or just the lack of budget in many cases, or resource constraints of skilled people turnover, et cetera. They can't have any mishap. One mishap or one break or crack allows the adversary to be successful. So kind of looking at the old mindset, where it's more reactive. Hey, we have compliance requirements. Being compliant historically, everyone assumed meant you were secure. But I think it's becoming paramount or more clear that the probability an organization is going to prevent every attack is near zero. And I think that awareness is starting to increase because many of the victims are compliant. They are doing a lot of the things they should be doing. Or the scale and scope of the attack surface is just so great that it's not realistic for them to do everything. So they've got to kind of switch the mindset and start, instead of waiting for something bad to happen and then go fix it, start being more proactive. Let's plan for these bad things to happen. How do we reverse engineer from this worst case scenario, and build in mechanisms to not necessarily stop every attack, but how do we survive it and recover quickly? So I think the more resilient organizations and having that as a focus versus preventing all of the attacks and being compliant is not how we're going to win, or at least stay in the game anymore.
2 days ago, I was at the Google Public Sector Summit, and boy, they were talking about the cloud as being the answer. They were using words like quadrillion and petabytes, and the implication is that, well, yeah, the cloud is they didn't state it exactly, but it's more secure. But maybe this emphasis on cloud migration might have opened the door for some attacks. Is that right? I mean,
anytime you add complexity on the defender side, right? So anytime you add complexity, more attack surface, it's just opportunity for an adversary to be effective. And it doesn't even have to be technical issues. It could be the non-technical challenges as well that open the door. So some of the attacks, there's social engineering still. So there's been a lot of attacks with destructive malware, like ransomware, for example, where the adversary calls a help desk and they get access to systems remotely, and then they go in and steal data and they encrypt all of the systems and they ransom the victims. So just because of the technical aspect, there's still the people and the processes piece of it that still also needs to be in place. So again, there's so many different avenues for an adversary, to get lucky once, that the more complexity in an organization, the easier it's going to be for the threat actor, or the likely it's going to happen at some point in time. Now, the key is, how do we prevent that from being a catastrophic event? How do we quarantine? How do we isolate it? How do we prevent it from impacting other environments, other critical systems, so it's not a system-wide failure or issue? And then obviously, based on that article and others, some of those dwell times, can be north of 5 years and even longer. So those are the in those cases, those adversaries know the network, they know the environment, they know the people in those systems better than probably the organization protecting them.
Well, let's talk about those systems a little bit now. Mm-hmm. So how are agencies currently monitoring their networks, and what protections do they have in place?
So, obviously not getting into too many details here. There's various defense in-depth mechanisms. There's a big push now across the federal government to move to a zero trust architecture environment, where the organization, has this assume breach mentality. But fundamentally, it's removing that implicit trust in the various systems. One area I think is probably one of the hardest pillars to focus on in zero trust is the data pillar. So removing implicit trust in the data. The data could be weaponized, it could be poisoned, so if you, I think also the importance of that pillar, I don't think it gets enough attention, but in that conference you were just mentioning that I was at, the symbiotic relationship between the data and artificial intelligence is incredible. So I think there needs to be more focus on the security, the integrity, immutability, the visibility and the sovereignty and the provenance of data that goes in to feed and train AI models. So, the AI solution you're building or the problem you're solving using AI is only going to be as good as the data. And if the adversary has the ability to modify, delete, inject, poison the data, then they ultimately can affect the results and the outcomes of whatever solution you're trying to apply AI to.
Yeah, when I read about zero trust and the 7 pillars, whatever, 8 pillars, and it starts with identity, I think people are starting to realize that, well, the whole idea is to protect the data, and there's all kinds of questions that pop up in there. So what recommendations do you have from a Rubrik perspective here for organizations trying to navigate the persistent threat from these nation-state actors?
Yeah, I think you kind of touched on I think, if you take the 10,000-foot view, what's really the most important thing? So kind of thinking like the adversary, I always like to look at problems from, maybe the end state or the desire and work backwards. So you mentioned, the importance of the data from a threat actor. So the adversary really wants two things. They want access to your environment, which is where the identity pillar, that's why that's so important. If you have access, you can log in, you can elevate privileges. That gives you the rights to a victim's environment. And then ultimately, to persist, you have to have that access. And then the next thing is, well, what are you going to do with that access? You want access to the data. So whether you want to delete the data, disrupt, break operations, you want to modify the data, or you just want to steal it. So those are really the two, I would say, most critical pillars is the identity, or that access that the identity gives you, and then the actual data, which ultimately will drive in all the AI systems that the government and commercial industry is trying to build. So what an organization can do from a Rubrik perspective, really focus on the data security aspect. So how do you survive the attack? How do you recover quickly? How do you know what data you have? So really combining the immutability, the security, the availability, and the confidentiality of the data, at least from a backup perspective, with the identity pillar. So one of the things we're doing is, once we're backing up, protecting a customer's environment, we can do a lot of analytics on that data in an out-of-band manner, which doesn't impact production, which is hugely important. And from that perspective, we can allow threat hunting. We can provide, looking for threats from a historical perspective. We can also help bridge the gap of the identity pillar and the data pillar around what users are accessing what data, how is that changing over time. So applying artificial intelligence, looking at anomaly detection, behavior monitoring, looking at risky behavior by certain users. So it allows you to kind of support a lot of those zero trust goals. I also think from the zero trust architecture perspective, so back in my day of working security operations, incident response, organizations, a system was down, they took it offline, maybe a breach or, a bug or something, a failed update. They go recover from backup. And the security teams historically don't know what backups are in the environment. They don't know much about them. And typically what happens is the IT teams, their job is focused more so on the availability of the environment. So they'll more often than not recover from a backup. And without the ability of knowing, without removing that implicit trust in the backups and in the data, I would say a high percentage of the time they're reinfecting or when they rehydrate the environment, they're reintroducing either the attack vector or the direct access of the threat actor. So I think that's one piece around zero trust architecture that I don't think people are thinking about enough yet. So that's kind of where I spend a lot of my time, unfortunately.
You set up a couple of terms here, proactive, reactive, and talked about threat hunting, which, when I think of Rubrik, I think of secure backup and immutable backup, but threat hunting. So this is a possibility where you're expanding to help improve resilience. Tell me more about that.
Sure. I mean, first and foremost, I'd say, organizations that don't innovate, they're not driving, as fast as possible to improve themselves. They're going to be left behind or be ineffective. So Rubrik's been very much on the forefront of innovation and adapting to what's happening and trying to get ahead of that. So the way the system was built with a lot of zero trust principles, we've been very successful historically, even predating my time, of helping organizations protect their data through a cyber attack. So what happened several years ago with the height and rapid evolution of ransomware and the significant costs of ransomware attacks, not just financial, but all the other costs, it was really impactful to customers, organizations, government, and private sector. So in those events, we've been able to help organizations survive the attack. But then we started getting questions like, how do I know the production was impacted? Because we don't protect production. But how do I recover the backup, or how do I know where to recover a known good point in time? So through helping customers in those early days of when ransomware was really starting at scale, Rubrik leadership decided, hey, this is a thing, and we need to start being more proactive. So we started building our enterprise edition capability, which provides a lot of those cybersecurity, security operational aspects, and automating. A lot of this is around automation as well, because we can't really scale and solve this problem with people. It's just the problem is too big and it's growing too fast. So a lot of this is with automation to make it really easy for organizations. So providing the ability to scan, do threat hunting, understand what data is in your environment, and do anomaly detection as well. So there's a lot of this constant cat and mouse game. Adversaries are evading endpoint detection. They're going straight into the hypervisor environment, and they're bringing down the entire virtualization infrastructure, where the adversaries or the defenders historically would detect malware and malicious code, kind of going a layer below that and having effects. So we've been building capabilities that allow organizations to kind of provide that level of visibility, that ability to survive and recover quickly. So I think that's really going to be the metric for success going forward is the ability to recover from a cyber attack. How long can that take your organization? Some of the victims that we've encountered that, non-customers, if they don't go out of business, that's one thing that's happening quite often. The next thing is probably it takes them hundreds of days to actually do the manual process or trying to rebuild, because they have no other way to do that. So what we've done is been able to automate that process and help organizations do that in, a matter of hours or within a day.
I was just thinking about that. I'm sure there's a phrase time to recover in many agency strategies here. And time to recover is, well, if you do it manually, let's say it's automated, or if it's automated and the recovery is weak, then all of a sudden that just delays the time of recovery. If you pull a backup up that is infected or has malware, all of a sudden it's the time to recovery. It's like, yeah, we recovered, but it was, so it's just, I'm sure resilience in the DoD means time to recover, and it means to effectively recover, not recover with still weaknesses.
Yeah, I think, not to get too specific, but I've experienced the pain of this in the past, and how expensive it is. Also, it's really, it impacts the mission, but it also impacts the people. So the people get burned out in the process, and then you recover and you reinfect the environment. You're doing a lot of different things that are not good. One is you're hurting morale, you're burning out your people, and then you also are, the mission folks that you're supporting that use the tools or the IT environment. They're losing trust in the systems and the services you're providing. So the worst thing that I think as a nation we would want as a military is send our troops in harm's way, and then they start losing trust in all these systems that are supposed to help them be, the best warfighters on the planet. So I think, that's the other thing that I've experienced, over the years, without getting into too many specifics, is, reinfecting the environment and then people losing trust in those systems. And we really have to break that cycle as well. So, I think, one aspect or one way to deter foreign adversaries from a cyber attack perspective is, hey, if they initiate cyber attacks, it's really not going to have the impact. We're going to deny them the benefit of that attack, right? If we bounce back, we survive, we don't lose data, and we can recover to a known good state within minutes. There's not really. It really deters and reduces the benefit of them actually doing those attacks. So I think that's where one aspect of military strength from a DoD policy perspective, we really need to get to. And that's what I would call in that proactive bucket that is very elusive in today's era.
So resiliency, it means to recover, but it also means to recover quickly. And so I can see how it's if they get attacked and get blocked, they get attacked and get blocked, attacked and get blocked. Well, both sides are going to get frustrated. Maybe that will just reduce the number of attacks because it's so effective and it can be tested as long as, resiliency is just all over the DoD.
So I would look at resiliency like Rocky. So no matter how many times Apollo Creed knocked him down, he got right back up. So that's like, if he goes down for the count, like that's kind of the world, compliance allows us to be today. So the organizations that realize that's not sufficient, it really is that resilience goal. And the resilience goal is kind of, what I would say is like, like Rocky.
I want to talk about compliance. It's a hot topic on this podcast, of course. And I'm sure there's federal regulations about complying for backups. And so are those just weak? Are those just outdated? Should there be new revisions from NIST or whoever has these backup strategies? I mean, it just seems like everything's changing so quickly as far as the attack surface and cloud and AI, and maybe these policies for backing up are from 7 years ago, huh?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a challenge. Not just on this, but in general, like the adversaries are always going to outpace compliance requirements.
Yeah,
the time to document them, if they only get updated every 10 years, the adversaries have evolved dramatically in 10 years, right? So the amount of investment in people, like at organizations like NIST, to solve this problem, the problem's probably much bigger than they're resourced and staffed to do. So, again, I think the proactive nature of what we're talking about is organizations can't wait for those things. If you look, I would say the commercial industry, and even some parts of state local government are adapting, evolving much faster than organizations that rely on compliance requirements to drive it. So for organizations to get cyber insurance, for example, they actually have to do things above and beyond compliance requirements, or they can't get cyber insurance, or their premiums are so high they can't afford it. So they're actually, like your home insurance, right? You're adding different mechanisms so you can get a lower rate or so you can get coverage. Think about that in the cyber realm. These organizations are like, well, if I can assure that I have the ability, I have immutable backups, I can recover quickly, my impact to customers, I'm not going to lose the data. My business will be more operational. I'm not going to have as much downtime. Well, then if you can prove those things, you're going to get better pricing on cyber insurance, or you can just get cyber insurance. Otherwise you might get kicked off. So that's driving a lot of change much faster than say in the federal government, where cyber insurance isn't something they can get. And there's no outside force that's driving them much faster than the rigorous kind of slow or understaffed compliance process.
I'm just thinking about insurance and car insurance, and so you have 3 kids. They get to an age, you add them to the policy. Add that one to the policy. Add that one to the policy. I know, I know it. Now, if you have a system that is resilient and compliant and works and is immutable, it's great. All of a sudden, then you make a transition to the hybrid cloud, and then there's another modification takes place, and then your backup policy is back from 2 years ago when it was effective. And I think people don't realize that. No, resilience, they talk about continuous monitoring. Maybe you should continuously monitor your backup strategy, because it's dynamic and changing. And well, now we have 3 kids and only 2 people on the policy. So it just gets out of hand. But people get, I guess, comfortable and relaxed. And if they know it's tested, it's good. We got Rubrik. But what about expansion, change? And it's the only way to resist any type of cybersecurity attack is adapt constantly, isn't it?
1,000%. Yeah. I mean, if not being complacent, not having a false sense of security, I think plenty of quotes in movies, in books, just whenever you think you're safe or secure or you're done, that's usually when bad things happen. So like in cybersecurity, you're never done. You can never do enough. That's why threat hunting came out, because they were like, security operations, we can't detect every attack. We know they're in there. So we have to be proactive and do threat hunt, look for remnants of a successful attack that we may have missed. So if you look at where, and I think, back to the earlier part of the conversation, adversaries are using our, human nature, our policies, the way we do contracting, whether it be in the government or industry, against us. So the gray space exists in every organization. It might be a little bit different depending on the composition of the organization, but there's always internal policies which the adversaries can gain access to. There's the compliance gaps or where they're weak in certain areas. And then there's also just the personal aspect of, the IT teams are usually siloed from the security teams or the cloud teams. And that silo creates opportunities or gaps where they can maneuver and work their way through. So as you were just mentioning, hey, we're on premise, but then we're moving to the cloud. Then that just adds more complexity, more gray space for them to maneuver through. So I think the organizations that are constantly testing, constantly drilling, most cyber exercises, hey, the red team tries to gain access somewhere. And then usually the exercise stops when, did the SOC detect the red team or did they miss them? And that's pretty much, the very narrow bubble of the exercise. There's very few organizations, and there are starting to be more. And I've worked with some in particular, but they're actually looking at, I'm more concerned about what happens after the next step of the attack. What happens if they are able to get in? What happens if they gain access? What if they can disrupt, break, destroy things, encrypt data, delete data, destroy our Active Directory or our identification and, our ICAM system? What if they go in and modify, delete that, and we can't log into systems or they're down? How do we let's start exercising how we start rebuilding, doing the triage, and break down those silos across all of those teams. And that's kind of where I think we need to get to. Right now, it's only the proactive organizations, and then potentially on the cyber insurance side. So there's some pockets where that behavior is starting to drive that change. But it's not going to matter how much we invest in zero trust architecture if all of these other things, the adversary is already in the environment and they just decide to have these destructive effects. Those certain things won't have any effect. So I think we can't really, that's why I like to work the problem backwards, because regardless of your mitigation path, there's always going to be around it. So you can never put all your eggs in that one basket.
No, it makes sense that if you tell me there's sleeper cells everywhere, even within the federal government, and zero trust is fine, but they're already inside, and then they attack in 1 year. And so I'm putting this all together. So why would Rubrik ever do threat hunting? Well, because they have to examine past backups. And if an agency uses product A and it has a damaged backup, how are you going to know? And so the good, if you want to restore to a known good point, well, how do you know it's a good point unless you have some threat hunting capabilities? So I never connected with you at all. It didn't make it, but now it makes perfect sense because they're already in. And we started off saying, they're already in, they're inside the moat, they're inside your castle. And when they attack, then you have to be able to go to the best known state. And that's where the threat hunting comes in. So it's, I think it's Star Trek Next Generation. No, it's Next Generation Backups. Like, yes, assume the breach. Now, what does that imply for strategy? It implies that these backups have to be good. So it's getting more complicated every day and constant threats and attacks. And wow, I don't know how you're going to juggle this in the next 5 years. What's going to happen in the next 5 years, Travis? What do you see?
Oh, geez. Yeah. I mean, a movie buff here. So the original Roadhouse movie, when Patrick Swayze is like, it's going to get worse before it gets better. Unfortunately, I think that's going to be what's going to drive the case. But there's going to be people that are like, I see the canary in the coal mine, and I'm going to start getting ahead of this a little bit. So but yeah, I mean, I think ultimately the leveraging of adversaries using AI is going to dramatically accelerate the volume of attacks. It's going to accelerate, it's going to remove the human out of the loop, where these attacks are more automated, they're more effective and compelling. That the chance or the likelihood of not having that human in the loop is the effects are going to be more impactful, more disruptive, because there won't be a person there saying, oh, wait a minute, that's maybe a major airline, or that's a gas, a pipeline company or something like, something that would really be catastrophic, that would get like the full force of the American government or military behind it. So I think the rapid increase or the likelihood, them using this technology without any constraints really means there's going to be a lot more mishaps going forward. So just kind of like, little Nostradamus here a little bit. Like I don't see any scenario where the volume of these attacks and the disruptive effects, there's no way they're not going to increase in the future. So I think that's gonna happen over the next several years. So we need to start, being ready for that and being prepared as much as possible to minimize that effect. I think a lot of our systems and a lot of people take for granted that they just work. We've seen significant impacts globally from various service providers for various reasons the last couple of years. So I think the dependence and the fragility of a lot of this, I think a lot of people take for granted, but I really think that's we need to get ahead of that more. Otherwise, things are probably going to get significantly worse. And then hopefully we can recover at that point. But that's one thing that kind of keeps me up at night. And then the other thing, from a threat actor perspective, it's always this cat and mouse game. The next thing I think is going to keep happening, and we're starting to see it in the news over the last couple of years, is the supply chain attacks. So the threat actors are like, well, I'm not going to go target 100 different organizations at once. The likelihood that one of the 100 is going to detect me, and then I'm going to burn my tools and make it hard for me. I'm going to go after, I know 100 of these organizations maybe purchase this one product. I'm going to go target that product company. I'm going to inject malicious code. So when all of those organizations that use this software or this hardware, they do a software update, they're going to trust this regardless. So regardless of what zero trust architecture you're building, they're just going to inject my malicious software or update. It's going to come right in the front door, and they're going to shake my hand as I come in because they're going to trust me and think I'm good. And then it's really going to give them keys to the kingdom. So I think even those scenarios, and we're seeing that increase, that's going to even be more of a reason that organizations need to have this ability to be more resilient, so that those things aren't catastrophic for the organization.
Yeah, I think the message here is being more proactive and understanding the paradigm shift, and the old answers don't work anymore, and you have to be more flexible and adaptable using immutable backup 12. This has been a wonderful interview, Travis, and unfortunately we're running out of time. You have been listening to the Federal Tech Podcast with John Gilroy. I'd like to thank my guest, Travis Roseik, Public Sector Chief Technology Officer at Rubrik, Rubrik.
Thank you, John.